Hello, welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Chandler Klebs, and I'm here with George Ortega and Michael Laster. And most of us on this podcast just happen to be atheists. But George is a pantheist, and I think there might be some slight differences between what that means to him and how most of us describe as, atheist or agnostic or something like that. And it's sort of a rare thing, too. So perhaps George could tell us how he feels that pantheism, what it means, and how it's different than atheism, perhaps.
Okay, first of all, I want to say that also Albert Einstein was a pantheist. This isn't like some kind of a fringe position, and basically it's a very logical position. It simply says that God and the universe are synonymous. So in other words, like for people who claim that God doesn't exist, that's kind of like claiming that the universe doesn't exist. And basically part of pantheism basically says that the universe, the entirety of the universe, is both conscious and intelligent. So those are the 2 points that I want to try to champion in this podcast.
Ah, okay. So conscious and intelligent. So you say pantheists say that?
Well, yeah, actually, there's a term called panpsychism. Um, it's basically just attributing consciousness to the universe and like intelligence. In other words, like the intelligence component of this is something that's derived from the following logic. Let's say we human beings do something that we consider intelligent, and we do intelligent things all the time, right? Writing books, just like so much, but it's not our intelligence because we don't have a free will. So we have to attribute this intelligence, therefore, to something else. And our understanding of causality, leads us to understand that the causal chain behind any intelligent act we make regresses back to the Big Bang. So we can either say like the Big Bang is the source of the intelligence for everything we do, or we can go beyond that and say, well, that caused the Big Bang is. But like the point is like that there has to be intelligence in the universe to guide our human actions because we don't have a free will.
Ah, interesting. Now, I have read about panpsychism before, um, and it's kind of interesting because I read something in John Gray's book near the end of it. I read John Gray's The Soul of the Marionette, and he was talking about materialism, the idea that everything's material, physical, and the fact that we know consciousness exists implies that material itself can be conscious. So
Well,
I think that could be a sort of pantheistic or panpsychist type of argument for universal consciousness. What do you think of that?
all right, here's the reasoning. Basically, you have these laws of nature, gravity, the electromagnetic force, the weak nuclear force, the strong nuclear force. You have these laws of nature that govern everything. Now, like by a certain very simple but unavoidable logical um, perspective, in order to govern something, you have to be aware of it. In other words, like you can't govern something that you're not aware of, and that applies to like we tend to like hold this reality as inanimate, that it's a thing. No. In order to govern itself, the universe has to be conscious of itself. Again, consciousness means awareness, and how else can like these laws of nature govern everything unless they're aware of everything?
Yeah, and what's interesting about this, George, is what it comes down to is consciousness obviously extends beyond humans because a lot of people say that only human beings are conscious, which, I think that's pretty crazy. Um, but certainly, we think of other animals as being obviously conscious and plants to some extent. Um, you know, you use the example of the Venus flytrap, and obviously they respond and they absorb the sunlight. That flowers open and absorb the sunlight and close in dark and kind of sleep. And I've watched a TED talk and things explaining that their roots grow towards a sound that they hear. So we know that consciousness already applies to the animal and the plant world to some extent, and perhaps it would be not too much of a stretch to think that even the matter and other things that we think are not conscious, that they're mindless, we could be wrong on that.
Okay, Mike, we haven't heard from you. What's your take on this?
Okay, my take on this is that I have no problem with the idea that the universe and God are synonymous, that you could use both terms interchangeably. Where I have a problem is where we subscribe consciousness to the universe, which is something I don't see evidence for. I definitely agree that consciousness is a property of the universe through us. I believe that we are the pieces of the universe that have consciousness that we can definitely say for a fact, but we don't know how far down that goes and what it actually takes for something to be um, for conscious properties to be attributed to it. So I'm really an atheist as as far as that's concerned, in the sense that um, like I don't believe it um, until I see evidence of it. But evidence of something outside of ourselves being conscious is actually something we could cast doubt onto, even with each other, right? We're conscious, and therefore we know our own existence. But like, if we really want to be skeptical, we can really stretch that out into doubting the consciousness of each other, right? Because it's the problem of other minds. How do
Okay,
we
Mike.
really know? Yeah.
Yeah, I want to defend intelligence. I want to defend intelligence through consciousness. And I think, can we agree that in order for anything to be defined as intelligent, it would have to be conscious also. In other words, something can't be
What about
intelligent.
computers? What about computers?
I wouldn't call a computer intelligent. I mean, like, actually, wait a minute. No, that's a good question. So in other words, like, actually, yeah, and to the extent that we call computers intelligent, what's your take on this, Mike? Would you call them intelligent or not?
Um, I think it exhibits the behavior of intelligence, if we're going to call intelligence a behavior as opposed to an internal state,
Okay,
as
so
opposed
actually,
to a mental state.
right, Mike, with computers are in the same dilemma as we human beings. Because, like, do we call us intelligent? Because, like, basically, the difference between a computer and a human being is that a computer is not conscious of what it does, whereas human beings are. Otherwise, like, I think our intelligences are in many ways comparable. But, like,
Okay.
all right, so, like, so basically, now let's say we, again, if we human beings, like we human beings, why do we say what we do is intelligent? Do we say it because of the mechanisms involved in intelligence, or do we say it because of the expression of what we consider intelligent?
Both.
All right, so here's the thing. So, like, basically, let's take the second, the what we do is intelligent. In other words, like, before we had any knowledge of the brain, like, let's say in the 1700s and all, I think we were calling human acts intelligent, and we didn't know, the neurochemistry of it, but we still called them intelligent, right? So we can apply that same reasoning to the universe. And my argument is that, like, basically the most complex structure that we're aware of in the universe is the human brain. So,
No,
like,
but
but
when we attributed intelligence to each other, it's because we're projecting our own mental states onto each other, right? I'm aware that I'm conscious, and we project that onto each other.
I know it, Mike. My point is that
It's
we
a
don't
it's a
have.
leap of faith.
Mike, my point is, well, all right. So are you saying? All right, I think we can agree that when we attribute intelligence to human beings, we're just being metaphorical because we know that we don't have free will. So in other words, like you wouldn't attribute intelligence to a puppet, you would attribute intelligence to the puppeteer. So in other words, like in that same way, we human beings aren't intelligent. We just express the intelligence of whatever makes us do what we do.
This is interesting because I'd like to weigh on this intelligence thing because, some person, some human who is able to calculate numbers really well and do math and do amazing things like that, we call them intelligent often. But computers can do a lot of these things that we consider intelligent when applied to humans, only computers can do it better than us. And so it's kind of, I guess it needs to be like, what do we mean exactly by
Yeah,
intelligence?
that's why I brought up the difference between intelligence being a behavior or a mental state, right? One is something you can observe, and the other is something that we ourselves experience through introspection.
All right, so let's come up with an example of intelligence that we can agree on, and let's explore it. So, Mike, so what would you define as something that as intelligent that we human beings do?
Any sort of calculation, any sort of mental shortcuts we take to make sense of the world and group things into abstractions.
All right, let's get a bit more simple. You want a mathematical calculation? Would you define that as intelligent? Like adding, subtracting?
Sure. Yeah.
All right, so here's the thing. So like adding and subtracting are intelligent acts, right? But here's the problem for us. We don't have a free will. In other words, like we are compelled by this chain of cause and effect to be able to add and then to come up with the right answer. So my point is like, yes, adding is an intelligent act, but it's not our intelligent act. It belongs to that which compels us to do it.
Hmm. This,
I
yeah.
I see what you're saying. Um, in that case, I might be willing to attribute intelligence to the universe, but still not consciousness.
So they might.
Except through us.
So the intelligence and consciousness maybe could be separate.
Yeah.
All right, then let's then kind of like define more clearly what we mean by consciousness, because to my mind it would seem that like something has to be conscious in order to be intelligent. But before we explore that, so Mike, how would you define consciousness?
Being capable of mental states or like internal states, anything that can experience, keyword experience, the world around it.
All
Um,
right, go ahead, Chandler.
and how I just say it is basically that it's awareness, that you are aware of something, that there's something that you know and you're perceiving it somehow through whatever sense, sight, hearing, smell, whatever. And obviously consciousness is required in order to respond to something.
All right, so under that definition, would we conclude, let's say, a single-celled organism that's able to like perceive and detect and ingest and digest food, it would have to be conscious of this food in order to do that. It'd have to be aware of it.
No, it could just be a complex machine, a complex biological machine.
But all right, but our brains are complex biological machines. So what would be the difference between our being aware and the cell not being aware?
Because we can only observe the cell through its behavior, whereas we can observe our own consciousness through introspection.
Well, wait a minute, Mike. Are you saying that like other like lower life forms
Do you
are
see
not
the
conscious?
difference
Well,
there?
again, my question, Mike, my question is like, because you seem to be attributing consciousness solely to human beings who have the power of introspection. But for example, like, there's other, like, mice. You're saying that mice are not conscious because they don't have introspection?
Uh,
No, I'm saying that um, mice are definitely conscious because for the from what we know, it does take a central nervous system to be in order to be conscious, and there has to be, um, you know, neurons connected to a central nervous system that sense external stimuli, and then we um, basically are, when we say we, or when I say I'm basically referring to my central nervous system, which is, the center of where all these all these neurons connect to. And so, based on that assumption, I'd say yes, a mouse would be, but perhaps not a single-celled organism.
All right, well then let me ask you a question. Like, so again, 300-400 years ago, we had no evidence for this neurobiology that comprises our brain and nervous system. So are you saying that back then it would have been mistaken to consider human beings and other animals conscious?
I'm saying it still is, to some degree, a leap of faith to assume that other people, out, that anyone other than ourselves is conscious.
You're basically, I think that's I think therefore I am, right? The idea that the only thing we can be absolutely sure of is our own consciousness.
Yes, though I do think, there is understandable evidence to, attribute mental states to other people and to a lot of other living things.
Right. Chandler, what's your take on this so far?
Well, my take on this is very interesting because one reason that I do tend to ascribe consciousness to individual cells and stuff is because I've never understood the reasoning of getting consciousness from a collection of unconscious cells. And so it always seemed to me that consciousness in some form had to be at the cellular level, had to be at the most basic level, or it couldn't exist on the massive scale.
Actually, that's interesting, Chandler, because that's actually the argument Galen Strawson uses. Galen Strawson is one of the prominent free will refuters. You know, his father was a famous free will defender, and he refers to this panpsychism, this idea that, yes, as you're saying, that like basically there has to be a fundamental consciousness, within reality, within the universe, that then for consciousness to then emerge within, biochemical and biomechanical processes.
Huh.
Okay, so George, are you ultimately saying that computers then are conscious?
Well, again, like just as with computers and human beings, computers don't have a free will, and we human beings don't have a free will. So most technically, even though, like, for example, when we say that, like, we human beings only quote unquote metaphorically choose, we never really literally choose anything because it's not really our choice. It's the choice of whatever's making us choose. So in that same way, I think we can say that both computers and human beings aren't quote unquote technically conscious because it's not our consciousness. In other words, like, we're not technically intelligent because it's not our intelligence. Like a robot that does something intelligent that's programmed to do, it's reflecting or expressing the intelligence of whatever makes it. So Mike, I think, yes, I think that basically, like, we use consciousness, in referring to human beings and robots in the sense that we attribute it to an expression, but I think most fundamentally, it can't belong to either computers or human beings because of this causal regress.
This is interesting, guys, because I think the fundamental difference between computers and man-built machines and humans is the desires and the emotions that make us feel a certain way about something. Because even if you try to say that computers are aware of what's going on, they perhaps would not care. They would either not understand or not care about religious or political issues. They would not have that concern, whereas we do, because we're always on and we can't escape our consciousness, and we know that things affect us like that.
But you agree that, consciousness can take place without there being any emotions or desires present?
Yeah, I think maybe it could. If there was some kind of consciousness that was aware, but it did not have any emotions related to something.
Yeah, and in certain states of meditation, that's sort of what they aim for, just
Chandler,
complete equanimity.
yeah, Chandler, I'm gonna address your point by issuing the same challenge. In other words, like, just as like our choices are not really ours because they're compelled upon us, our intelligence isn't really ours because it's compelled upon us, and our consciousness, so our emotions and our feelings. In other words, like, we don't feel anything that we're not compelled to feel. They're not really our feelings. Or, we feel them. We certainly feel them, but they're not really our feelings in terms of authorship.
Yes, and that's a very powerful point, George, especially in getting people to understand that free will is an illusion. Just because if people could just choose their emotions, you would think everybody would be blissed out.
All right, so let's get back to the issue. Like, like, do we need a mechanism to explain consciousness, or like, for example, let's see if I can, like, again, like 300, like, so Mike, all right, you were saying, like, you were referring to this, like, I think therefore I am, in terms of like complete certainty. In other words, like, we can't basically say that anything is conscious outside of ourselves, but I think we can agree that we kind of like assume or take as a priori knowledge, for example, that the universe exists, like outside of us. In other words, like, let's say there wasn't a universe, right? There would be nothing for us to be conscious of, even ourselves. Like when we think, actually, no, it's interesting. But all right, but yeah, in terms of like the universe outside of ourselves, even though it may not be completely provable, just like you're saying, our consciousness of ourselves are, we're kind of accepting that it exists, right? Can we work with that premise?
Yes, I agree that I'm not, as extreme of a skeptic to deny that there's an outside world.
All right, so now let's consider this in terms of like our accessibility to knowledge. Like, we're basically looking for a mechanism of the universe's consciousness. We know we have a mechanism by which, human beings express the universe's consciousness through our neurobiology, right? But now, in terms of looking for a mechanism for the universe's consciousness, we come up against a very, very powerful problem. And that problem is that we can only detect with our best machinery, our best technology, only 4% of the observable universe. 96% is completely inaccessible to us. So in a certain sense, we're saying, well, we're looking for a mechanism of universal consciousness, intelligence, and all within 4% of this entity. It's like going into a room and looking for something and concluding that it doesn't exist, after just looking in 4% of the room.
Huh. George, I have a question about this. Now,
Wait, are you talking about our senses?
No, Mike, I'm talking about dark matter and dark energy in our physical universe.
Oh, okay.
yeah, my question is now, while I'm not necessarily, I guess, like I don't really have a problem with pantheism or necessarily some kind of universal consciousness, but I do want to know, can this, if this is true, can this help us in our day-to-day life in some way?
Well, I think what it can help us do is bridge this like seemingly insurmountable gap between religion and science. In other words, if we can claim that like this whole thing of whether God exists and whether science and all, basically God is synonymous for science, all of a sudden then like we refute certain like absurd notions about God. Like, for example, God can't be all good because obviously like there's evil in the universe. And we what the utility of this, Chandler, is moving religion from this nonsense that some guy a long time ago says this is the way it is, and because this person says that we have to believe it. We move from that to a more evidence-based scientific understanding of God. It allows us to maintain our spirituality within a scientific discipline.
Interesting, because I mean, I can see utility in that. For example, because a lot of the world religions that we've got going on now, the major ones, they are just like, well, this is true because some dude said this and this ancient book has this written in it. So perhaps a more science-based, observational, logical conclusion of some other type of religion, such as pantheism, could perhaps replace the current very harmful religions that we see in our world.
Yeah, not just I mean, they're all harmful, and to the extent that, like, again, like they believe what they believe, not because they have evidence, not because, just because like some guy said it. So yeah, to the extent we move from that to a reason, logic, science-based, because Mike, that isn't that the foundation of atheism? That basically, like, show me proof or something, because like otherwise, that somebody said it is simply not enough.
Yeah, which is why I don't, subscribe to consciousness in anything outside ourselves other than, other sentient beings. But in that sense, I'm not like a hard atheist in that sense where I'm saying it's a definite no, right? I'm not like, it's not an active belief. It's more of a passive belief.
Well, what's interesting about this, guys, is I have an interesting take of how, take for example, I could be a pantheist and an atheist at the same time. And here's how I
Yeah,
think I can do this. Because I could actually go for the idea of a universal consciousness or maybe even intelligence in some form, but at the same time, I don't believe in the traditional, most common idea of God, monotheism or polytheism, the idea that there's these human guys up in the sky somewhere that are like, oh, this person sinned, I'm going to punish them. Like, that's kind of how the only kind of religion I know from what I've studied of a lot of world religions. But there's none of that in pantheism. And so I don't find, like, I find that both pantheism, like, and atheism are kind of compatible in a way with each other, but not so much with monotheism like Christianity or Islam.
Yeah, Mike, what's your take? You seem to be agreeing on Chandler on at least some
yeah,
of that.
I agree.
Excellent. All right, so here's the thing. So now we move the debate to
Yeah,
not
I agree.
Mike.
No, I agree that you can be an atheist and a pantheist at the same time, or
Excellent.
panpsychist, really.
Yeah, so we move this whole religious, this God versus no God debate from whether God exists to what is the nature of God. In other words, like the religions have, if the religions claim that God told them something about like reality a few thousand years ago and that it's forever true, then that's just, they don't understand God. And the reason why our free will podcasts are so important, because if anybody claims they know God and they believe they have and they believe in free will, they don't know the first thing about God. Because basically what they're saying is like that because we have a free will, God is not all powerful. And one thing we know about the laws of nature is that they are all powerful. They govern everything. So like, again, like this refutation of free will, I think is the first step toward understanding the true nature of God, which is like completely different from what all these religions have been teaching us for several thousand years.
I think this could be a benefit because, in most religions, it's always that you have to get knowledge of God through a book or through your priest or rabbi or pastor or through human made teachings, even though they weren't fundamentally up to them because nobody has a free will. But if people could, through pantheism or something like that, experience a oneness with the universe, that feeling of being connected to something bigger than just themselves, that's what they might seek, and perhaps they can get that through what you're suggesting without having to necessarily believe in free will, eternal torment, all that other stuff.
All right, Chandler. Yeah, I guess we're over the 30-minute mark. So this is the next one. I think we need to pursue this further because, like, if we're going to like tell people that they don't have a free will, can you imagine how hard it is for people to accept that? I mean, you and I, you guys do and I do because we're very logical. We don't allow our emotions to like interfere with our logic. But a lot of people in the world need kind of like a better reason to believe it. So I think we're onto something. So Chandler, I guess we're over, right?
Yeah, okay, so I'll close this one out. Okay, you've been listening to Free Will, Science, and Religion with Chandler Klebs, George Ortega, and Michael Laster. We've been talking about pantheism and atheism, intelligence and consciousness, and all that fun stuff. So stay tuned for more. Thanks for listening to this episode. Bye.